Hey everybody, Matt Colville here. This is not a video for new DMs, it is a video for new players, or potential players. Welcome to Dungeons & Dragons. You're watching this video because, well, probably you're watching because you're a subscriber of mine, in which case, hello. But I hope you're watching because a friend of yours invited you to play D&D, and you're sorta maybe interested, but you're not entirely sure what it is you're signing up for. By the end of this video, you will have a clear understanding, a less vague understanding. You probably won't be more confused. There are things I enjoy as much as D&D or more, but they involve hand-eye coordination or biology. I think D&D is the most fun you can have with your brain, but there's a lot of assumptions and traditions built into it that aren't written down anywhere. Let's talk about them. Before we start, I want to say this may be a long video, but you don't need to watch any of it. There was no YouTube or indeed internet when I started. When I started, if you saw someone playing D&D, you probably had no idea what they were doing. It looks incredibly weird, but they were obviously having fun. If you asked, "What are you all doing?" the canonical answer was, "Grab a seat, here's a character sheet." It was pointless to try to explain it to somebody. Explanations are boring, says the dude who's about to spend half an hour explaining it to you. Much easier to just sit down and play. However weird the game seems, you will pick it up as you go. So by all means, just sit down and play. But having introduced the game to a few dozen people now, here are some of the things I've noticed that we who play all take for granted, but that aren't really written down anywhere. How long will it take? This is the question I get the most when I ask friends at work who've never played before if they want to try it. It's the first question they ask, so it's the first thing we're going to cover. I think the typical D&D session lasts somewhere around 3 hours, sometimes less, sometimes more, but when that session is over, the expectation is you're going to get together again, maybe next week, and pick up where you left off. D&D is like television. This episode might be great. Don't you want to know what happens next episode? So when someone invites you to play, they're probably hoping you take to it like a hobby the way they do. But it's perfectly reasonable to say, sure, I'll give it a shot, and play one session and then say, thanks, that was fun, and be done. Just talk to the folks who invited you. Say, I do want to try it, but I don't necessarily want to sign up for a whole new hobby yet. They will understand. What do you need? Well, nothing, really. You can just show up with your beautiful self and say, okay, what do I do? Your friends will supply the dice and pencil and paper and probably a copy of this, the player's handbook. There's no point buying all this if you don't know whether you like the game yet. Choosing a character. Probably the first thing you'll do when you sit down to play is create a character. Your character is a combination of race, which maybe makes more sense to think of as species, and class, like elf ranger or human fighter or dwarf barbarian. There's no real way as a new player to know exactly what every class does. A lot of the terms and options won't make sense to you at first, and trying to read it all before you make a decision is basically impossible. So I recommend just looking at the art in the player's handbook and picking a race-class combination that looks cool. Nothing wrong with that. Once you know your race and class, you pick a background that describes what did you do before you were an adventurer. Like, before Bilbo was a thief, he was... Actually, I think that's a bad example. I have no idea do hobbits even have jobs? Are they just living in some kind of post-scarcity utopia? Role-playing. The basic rinse and repeat of D&D is as follows. The DM describes the scenario, the scene in front of you. You are free to ask questions during this period. You are even free to interrupt and declare your character's action, though I do not recommend doing that until you have a sense for the flow of things. Once the DM is done describing the scenario, they'll say, "What do you do?" or some variation thereof. As long as you are describing what your character does, you're role-playing. That's it. It doesn't have to be any more complex than that. The DM says, you roll into town. He describes the town. He asks what you're going to do. You say, I'm going to check out the inn and see if we can get a place for the night. That was it. You just role-played. Some players like speaking in character. When your character walks into the inn, you might say, okay, I'm going to ask the innkeeper how much a room for the night costs. That's perfectly fine. It's fine to say I when you mean your character. Everyone does it. It's not weird. It's normal. We will know from context when you mean I, the player, and I, my character. But some players might say, I approach the innkeeper and say, greetings, fellow. We have traveled far and need rest. That isn't better than what you did. It's just different. It's a style of play. It's fun, especially once you get over the weirdness of sitting around talking in silly voices. But it's not required. Don't be surprised if your DM tries to coax you into speaking in character. Feel free to give it a try, but if it feels weird, if you're not comfortable doing it, don't. The goal is to have fun. If you don't find that fun, don't do it. What happens first? Well, the DM will probably start by describing the current situation your characters find themselves in. If it's the first session of the game, you might all meet in a tavern. If you're joining in the middle of an adventure, your character might be held captive in the next room. What can I do? The DM asks, what do you do? And you sit there stunned. You don't know what your character does. You don't know what they can do. What are your options? Well, because D&D has this weird thing, the Dungeon Master, who is a person with ideally a brain, you can try whatever you want. That's the DM's job, interpreting your actions through the lens of the rules, plausibility, probability, and the world all this takes place in. Because there's this person adjudicating your actions, you are free to try whatever, within reason. Unlike any other game you've played, you have limitless options, because the DM can use their imagination and maybe some die rolls to determine the outcome to anything. Playing D&D for the first time, it's normal to feel intimidated when it's your turn, or when the DM asks, "What do you do?" Relax. Eventually it'll become second nature. In combat, D&D becomes a lot more bounded. You can move and attack, basically, or attack and move, and there are clear rules for both. But outside of combat, it's up to you to figure out what you want to do. That freedom can be paralyzing, but it's also what makes D&D amazing in a way a board game or card game or video game can never be. I ran for a group of all new players, and they tried to infiltrate a watchtower overrun with goblins in the woods. They knew the goblins were in there, but they didn't want to just break down the door, alerting every goblin in the place. They wanted to sneak in and surprise the goblins. So they decided to scout around the outside of the tower, moving stealthily. They saw the top of the tower had collapsed. That was a way in. They could climb the tower and enter the hole in the top, and the goblins wouldn't know. Then they could start picking off the goblins inside one at a time until the goblins realized what was happening. Just as they were formulating this plan, a good one, and one I, the DM, had nothing to do with, they saw a guard standing in the hole in the wall at the top of the tower. The hole they intended to enter through. Now what? How to get up there without alerting the guard? They could shoot the goblin from where they were, but what if they missed? Or what if the arrow didn't kill the goblin outright? Then the goblin would sound the alarm and they'd lose the element of surprise. One of the players, Robbie, said, "Wait a minute, we can do whatever we want." "Yes," I said, I could see the light going on. "Well, my ranger can shoot an arrow, and if I hit it says I can move the target 5 feet in any direction." Very useful tactically. Could I shoot the goblin and, if I hit him, move him 5 feet this way so he falls out of the tower? "You can try," I said. He rolled, he hit, and I described as the arrow slammed into the goblin's shoulder, spinning him around and causing him to lose his balance and fall backward down to the ground. With a muffled thunk, the goblin hits the ground, dead from the arrow and the fall. To those players, that was an eye-opening moment. It was clear to them I had no idea they might try that. All I did was use the rules and some common sense to determine what happened when Robbie hit. It was easy. Robbie and the other players suddenly felt free to do what they wanted. It was a really simple thing, but that's the juice of D&D. It's your character. If it's reasonable, give it a shot. See what happens. Maybe the dice will go against you. That's part of the game. If you succeeded at everything you attempted, there wouldn't be much drama. On your turn. Part of the whole respecting the other players thing is knowing how your stuff works. The annoying player does the following. "Okay, it's your turn, me the player. What does your character do?" "I cast sleep." "Okay, sleep spell. Do you have that memorized?" "Yes." "Okay, what does sleep do?" "I have no idea. It's just written here on my character sheet." "Oh, I want to kill me the player." When combat starts, the game becomes a lot less open-ended. It's like taking turns in any other game. When it's not your turn, think about what you're going to do when it is your turn. It's okay if, when your turn comes, you're not exactly sure what you want to do. That's fine. Maybe you were just really interested in what was happening up until that point. The story. So you're playing your character in this adventure, and it seems like the DM has it all planned out. Well, probably not. Probably the DM just has a framework, an outline of the basic structure. Who the bad guys are, what they want. But the DM does not know what you are going to do, and since they don't know what you're going to do, they don't know what happens next. Once you describe your actions, then the DM decides what happens next based on their idea of what's reasonable, what's plausible, what's dramatic, what's fair. That intersection between what the DM had planned and how you react to it is where the game happens. It is D&D. So don't attribute too much intent on the part of the DM. Don't try to think about what the DM intended you to do, because they probably didn't know. They only knew what the bad guy's plan was and how they were going to go about it. And then a hook or two for how to get you into conflict with them. Then the DM sits back and watches. If you start trying to second guess the DM, what were we supposed to do? You may end up going in circles. It's okay if you get confused or frustrated to just ignore something, move on. Not all mysteries can be solved, and not everything the DM says is a clue. Also, D&D is about your character's story, so feel free to have some ambition. I mean, not the first time you play, but as you play and you learn about the world, feel free to aspire to something. When you meet Flight Captain Myriad of the Hawk Lords sitting atop his giant falcon resplendent in his feathered armor, you can decide, I want to be one of those dudes. If you meet two rangers in the forest and discover they're part of a secret society called the Coursers, you could decide you want to join them. Your DM will tell you how hard it is, to give you some clues, who to talk to or where to look. These things don't happen automatically. If you meet the Regent of Bedegar and think he's a Wangrod, you can decide you want to overthrow him. If you come back from the dungeon with heaps of gold, you could decide you want to build a keep or open an inn. All perfectly reasonable and part of a long tradition. It's your character, and the DM put this world in front of you on purpose so you would interact with it. Feel free to aspire to things, to have some ambition. You could research a new spell, or found an order of knights, or build a keep and become a lord. It may take months of play to achieve, but it will be awesome. Lastly, it's just a hobby, and a very weird one at that. It's okay to try it and then say, thanks, but it's not for me. Don't feel bad. I don't feel bad that I don't like model trains or bowling. Actually, I used to like bowling quite a lot. I probably still would. You get the point. It's not for everyone. I really hope that if a friend of yours invited you to play D&D, you give it a try. Say yes. Until next time, peace out.